Good afternoon to everyone. Wonderful to see you here. Welcome to the 46th Annual Moreau Lecture. I'm Father Michael Wirtz, a member of the Theology Department and the chair of the Moreau Lecture Committee. The Holy Cross priests and the brothers here at King's College are delighted to sponsor once again this annual theological lecture. And we're delighted to have you all with us here this afternoon, here in the Burke Auditorium at King's College, and all of you who are joining us by Zoom. The Moreau Lecture is an annual opportunity to bring to our campus scholars who can assist us in better understanding and making sense of the complexities of life by drawing from the rich heritage of the Christian theological tradition, and I trust that that will be true today also. I'm very thankful to the committee members of the Moreau Lecture who facilitated this afternoon. The first is Dr. Jim Ambury, a faculty member of the Philosophy Department and head of our honors program. Father Dan Issing, a Holy Cross religious and the chair of the Theology Department. Dr. Denise Rebele, who is faculty member of the Education Department, and Dr. Janice Thompson is a member of the faculty member of the Theology Department as well. So my gratitude to all of them for serving on this committee. To begin this afternoon, we think it's an appropriate time to recognize three new members of the Theta Alpha Kappa National Honor Society for Religious Studies and Theology. And so to do so, please welcome theology faculty members, Dr. Janice Thompson and Father Dan Issing.
So we would like to honor these three people. They have taken at least 4 theology courses, usually more, have achieved at least a 3.3 GPA overall and at least a 3.5 in theology and generally much higher. And we're very proud to induct them into Theta Alpha Kappa this year. First of all, Caleb Costas Cruz. And next, Michael Cohen. And last, Darlene Nunez. Thank you so much. And we are grateful to celebrate this wonderful accomplishment with you today. Thank you. Thank you, Father Dan.
Wonderful, thank you. A reminder that after the lecture, we will have time for questions. And those of you who are joining us on Zoom, feel free to type in your questions during the talk. You can do so in the chat panel. It's my honor to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Brett Robinson is an associate professor of the practice at the University of Notre Dame's McGrath Institute for Church Life. In this role, he teaches and conducts research on media, technology, and church history. He's the founder of the Church Communications Ecology Program at Notre Dame, which assists church leaders to engage more deeply with the challenges and opportunities created by the rise of digital technology and artificial intelligence, topics so very pertinent to us here at King's College and to the entire academic world, and important also for this region of Northeast Pennsylvania, where so many townships are debating or battling the construction of large AI data centers for artificial intelligence. Brett teaches courses on the history and the philosophy of technology. He has authored or edited 3 books, including Appletopia, Media Technology, and the Religious Imagination of Steve Jobs, a copy of which will be donated to the college library, and Catholic Media Studies, Theology, and Pedagogy, as well as numerous essays on religion, media, and culture. His essays have appeared in Wired, Church Life Journal, and Catholic News Service. Brett serves as a consultor for both the Vatican Dicastery for Communications and the Dicastery for Culture and Education, and is a member of the U.S. Bishops' Navigating Digital Accompaniment Working Group. He has previously taught at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh and St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And it was only made public, I believe, yesterday, that after 14 years, Brett will be leaving Notre Dame to join the faculty at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum in Rome. So congratulations, Brett, on that new appointment, and best of luck. And best of luck as you navigate your family across the Atlantic. Brett has also served as a producer on 3 documentary films that have aired on EWTN and in theaters nationwide. He's a 1997 graduate of Notre Dame and has a Ph.D. in mass communications from the University of Georgia. He and his wife live in South Bend for the time being with their 5 children. His lecture is titled Reality and Ritual, a Liturgical View of the Technological Revolution. Please welcome Dr. Brett Robinson.
Thank you, Father Michael. Thanks to all of you for coming. It's always good to be at another Holy Cross institution, to see some familiar faces. Thanks to the committee that put this together. Congratulations to Michael and Darlene and Caleb, 2 of whom have already left. But your GPAs are higher than mine in undergrad, so congratulations. And thanks to all of you again for being here. I see Father Gary here, who let me teach a little unit in the MDiv program at Notre Dame, where a lot of these ideas were planted in seed form. So I'm grateful to him for that. So with that, I'll get started. I think there'll be some time for questions at the end. Happy to take them. So as Father Michael mentioned, I'm in a period of transition right now. My wife and I just turned 50 together. This year we'll be celebrating 25 years of marriage. In September, we have 5 children. One of them will be going to Rome this fall to study architecture. Our other son will be a senior in high school and will be looking at colleges. And in a few months, we'll all be moving to Rome from South Bend, where I'll begin the new position at the Angelicum. In 25 years of marriage, I'm not sure we've had this many transitions at one time. And my wife thinks I'm weird because I kind of enjoy these transitional moments. There's something clarifying about standing at the threshold between 2 worlds, feeling that mixture of nostalgia for what's come before and the genuine uncertainty that accompanies standing at the edge of an unknown future. So if you're in college right now, which many of you are, you probably have a good sense of what this feels like. And you're not alone. We are all living through a civilizational moment in which the ground of our shared reality is shifting beneath our feet. And the temptation is to leap to one side or the other of the crack opening up beneath us. On one side is acceleration. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, trips to Mars, brain implants, all leaning into this science fiction future in which we inhabit other planets and become cybernetic organisms fused with our machines. On the other side is nostalgia. The Luddite movements that are trying to preserve older forms of culture and education, homesteading, more traditional forms of worship, classical education, the handwritten letter. The question becomes, which side are you on? If technological progress is inevitable, perhaps we should simply accelerate and try to reap the benefits. Improved medical treatments, augmented human knowledge, the elimination of tedious work. On the other hand, if acceleration is not your disposition, perhaps we should resist the logic of the machine by reviving the older forms of culture that we've lost in our relentless pursuit of efficiency and control. We could write poetic books like Paul Kingsnorth has called Against the Machine and make the case to your fellow humans that progress is a contested term. New does not always mean better. But this is a false dichotomy. In the giant fissure opening up beneath our feet, the church has always chosen a third way, down and through. Dante descends into hell before he can rise to paradise. Christ descends into the grave before he enters into the life of the resurrection. Edgar Allan Poe tells a story of 3 sailors who encounter a violent storm off the coast of Norway. It creates a huge whirlpool and tears their ship apart. One of the sailors ties himself to the mast, hoping that the strongest part of the structure will save him. Another brother casts himself overboard in despair. But the third takes a different tack. He observes the motion of the whirlpool. He studies its mechanics and notices that the buoyancy of an empty barrel keeps it afloat while everything else gets sucked under. so he grabs the barrel and survives. What saves him is not ingenuity alone, but vision, the ability to see what's actually happening and act accordingly. The Christian does not jump overboard in despair, but neither does he tie himself to the old mast of the sinking ship. He observes prayerfully and prudentially the motion of the spiral and finds the unlikely piece of wood that will save him. It is here that we can perceive the true motives of the accelerationists. They're afraid. They're afraid of death. There's a belief running from Francis Bacon through the Enlightenment and now flowering in Silicon Valley that by hijacking our human genome or uploading consciousness to a computer, we'll escape the one fate that's reserved for all mankind. This is a counterfeit immortality, a technological parody of the promise that Christ makes at Capernaum. Yes, you will die, but if you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will have eternal life. Christ's promise is liturgical rather than technological. If immortality is the goal, then the means by which we reach it and the signs by which it's made perceptible are fundamentally different from what Peter Thiel or Elon Musk envision. The sign that many of us carry in our pockets, Apple's logo, is instructive here. A piece of fruit with a bite removed, rendered seductively. Christ is the new Adam, freeing us from slavery to sin, but we have regressed to the ways of the old Adam, tempted by the fruit of godlike knowledge and power, presented not in the form of a tree, but a network. Before we can think about what it means to respond to the technological revolution as Catholics, we need to understand what kind of revolution we are actually living through. This requires a kind of perceptual discipline that does not come naturally to us, because the most powerful features of any media environment are precisely those that we stop noticing. Marshall McLuhan observed this when he said, "We don't know who discovered water, but we can be pretty sure it wasn't a fish." The medium in which we swim shapes the content we receive and the selves that we become, and it does so most powerfully when it's invisible. McLuhan's famous dictum, "The medium is the message," is often treated as a clever aphorism and then set aside, but its full theological weight has rarely been appreciated, perhaps because McLuhan himself was drawing on something deeper than communication theory when he coined it. What McLuhan understood, and what the Catholic intellectual tradition illuminates, is that every medium of communication embodies a cosmology. It instantiates a particular relationship between the human person, the community, and ultimate reality. It structures the contours of what can be said, felt, known, and desired. This is why Pope John Paul II, in the Rapid Development, insisted that we're not simply dealing with a neutral tool for information, but with something that transforms the formation of personality and conscience, effective relationships, cultural phenomena, and the development of social, political, and economic life. And it's why Pope Francis in Laudato Si went further still when he said technological products are not neutral. He wrote, "For they create a framework which ends up conditioning lifestyles and shaping social possibilities along the lines dictated by certain powerful groups." That makes your smartphone no more neutral than an atomic bomb. It unleashes a shockwave of not radioactivity, but interactivity that causes the entire culture to undergo a dramatic mutation. The pornography app and the prayer app, two worlds that were once as distinct as the brothel and the cathedral, now occupy the same virtual territory. Despite all your striving for virtue, you're always one tap away from something vicious. This is not a neutral tool. It's purposefully designed by behavioral engineers to extract human attention and maximize your brain's dopamine production. The net result of all that pleasure is not the maximization of pleasure, but the exhaustion of pleasure. Moments that used to be filled with genuine emotional intensity, the birth of a child, a major accomplishment at work, the sudden recognition of beauty, begin to flatten out. And the only way to recover some of that joy is in the digital realm is to post about it on Instagram in the hopes of getting more dopamine from the likes and congratulatory comments that it generates. You've traded the experience for its representation, the reality for its simulation. In his book, The Burnout Society, Byung-Chul Han has argued that we live in an achievement society. No longer bound by the demands of tradition and older forms of authority, we internalize the pressures to succeed and optimize ourselves so that the external pressures are not even needed. We do it to ourselves. The neoliberal subject is constrained by nothing. There's no external authority telling her what to do, and is therefore free to exploit herself without limit. The burnout, the depression, the attention disorders that characterize our moment are symptoms of this auto-exploitation. And the digital platforms that promise to connect us are in fact the instruments through which this exhaustion is produced and monetized. This is what Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism, a new logic in which human experience itself is the raw material extracted and processed into behavioral prediction products sold to corporate clients. We are not the customers of these platforms. We are the resource and the product. It is here that we need something Aristotle's concept of phronisomai. There's a split between Sophia, the love of theoretical wisdom, and techne, the studied approach to making systems and artifacts for practical purposes. The technologists are extraordinarily skilled at techne. They understand the mechanics of attention, the neurochemistry of habit formation, the architecture of engagement, but what they lack, almost by definition, is an account of the good toward which all this technique are not always great at being practical. What's needed is the integration of both, wisdom about ends and in its fullest theological register. Them shape the intellectual journey that brought me here. My career began at the University of Georgia's New Media Institute in 1999 at the dawn of the commercial internet. We actually constructed a Wi-Fi network that covered downtown Athens using wires and old Pringles cans to send internet signals from our campus lab to the coffee shops and bars bustling college town. Access so that people didn't have to be chained to a computer to do their work. But we created a new problem, the dissolution of the boundary between work and leisure. Physical spaces once reserved for rest, for conversation, for unprogrammed encounters with other human beings were becoming mobile. The warm chatter of voices, where human interaction was being replaced by personal devices and earbuds, what Sherry Turkle aptly called being alone together. By solving the efficiency problem, we created new social and spiritual problems. We were able to communicate more information, but less of our humanity. It's not been lost on me that this recognition place in a town called Athens. I left behind the world of new technology and returned to academia, where I could puzzle over these tensions in a more philosophical way. That journey eventually led me to St. Vincent College in Latrobe, not far from here, near the oldest Benedictine monastery in the United States. And the contrast could not have been more sharp. After nearly a decade of working in digital media for the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Textron Corporation, and then an advertising agency, I took up residence near 100 monks and a small but dedicated student body, and I began to think seriously about the rhythms and rituals of monastic life as a model for what Aristotle called phronesis. That's when I came upon a little book called Letters from Lake Como by the Italian-German theologian Ramon. It became a skeleton key of sorts for unlocking my perception to truly see what was happening rather than just judging it. What Guardini saw when he returned to his home country of Italy was a collision between the old world of human culture and the new raw power of industrialization on the horizon. I heard something in Guardini's story that resonated with my own. When I worked for the Penguins in Pittsburgh, I used to come to Wilkes-Barre to watch the baby pens. This place reminds me also of my coal miner who died of black lung at a relatively young age. When I heard stories about my great-grandfather, I imagined men covered in coal dust emerging from pitch-black mines. So it came as a surprise when I learned that Wilkes-Barre is known as the Diamond City, and that Jeannette, Pennsylvania, where my grandfather settled after the war, is called the Glass City. Of course, Wilkes-Barre is known for anthracite, which is known as black diamonds, and then Jeannette was one of the biggest, world's biggest glass producers. The only thing, at their industrial height, these towns must have looked more like the land of Mordor than the land of Oz. In 1868, James Parton famously called Pittsburgh's factory landscape, quote, hell with the lid off. As a kid, I would play wiffle ball with my sister in my grandparents' backyard in Jeannette, and in their small patch of yard was a grape arbor and a garden. Herbs, mostly, and some tomatoes. If you hit the ball over the hedge lining in the yard, it was a home run, and every home run ball alley right next to the towering edifice of an aging factory. Hitting a home run meant unlatching the back gate and walking into the alley, each time experiencing an uncanny feeling. Standing on the gravel path between two worlds, the world of nature, carefully cultivated in my grandparents' miniature garden, tomatoes starved for sunlight. An image came rushing back when I started reading Guardini's Country in the early part of the 20th century and finds himself in his own alleyway between garden and factory, between the human and the inhuman. Strikes Guardini walking through the valleys of Bionza to nature, but harmonizes with it. Reach a climax in the belfry of the bell tower. All these things caught up and encircled by the well-constructed something close to an epiphany is that a truly human culture does not destroy nature, but sings harmoniously with it. But rising above the pristine landscape, Guardini also sees a factory. He writes with undisguised anguish about this, and everything falls apart. Here was form, closer to humanity. Here was nature, indwelt by humanity. And now I saw it breaking apart. He acknowledges that in Germany, they've even learned to see something valuable in what's unavoidable. But the specific way, the older one, the factory does not sing with the mountains. It imposes itself on the landscape with a kind of ontological violence. Today, we don't think twice about seeing a factory. They're usually tucked away in an industrial part of town, so as not to detract from the city skyliners are being built for the digital economy. These sprawling factories quietly consume tremendous amounts of water and energy from the earth, a process completely removed from the billions of shiny digital screens that display and synthesize some total of recorded human knowledge. Phones powered by rare earth minerals, mined by invisible laborers in Africa. Minerals like europium, terbium, yttrium, are the new diamonds that create the phosphors that make has become the new Wilkes-Barre, the new Diamond City. Guardini's insight has been great precision in the framework of what I'm calling co-authors explore in a new volume from St. Augustine's Press out this summer. The term cosmotechnics comes from the Chinese philosopher Yukui, who argues that technology is not a portable category. You can't simply compare. Technology, he argues, extends distinctions that can be found within a given culture and which call for tact and attention before being uncritically compared. Every cosmotechnics is the outgrowth of a particular cosmology, a vision relationship between heaven, earth, and humanity. What we call a Catholic cosmotechnics then to the design of technology steeped in liturgical seeing after the whole by using an analogical compass. McLuhan is indispensable here, and not only for the obvious reason that he was himself a Catholic whose media theory was deeply shaped by his faith, on its full theological weight when we recognize what he understood about the incarnation. Jesus, as eternal logos, sacrament is both medium and message in Christ. The sacramental Trinitarian heart of this observation is central. The Logos does not merely convey information from God to humanity. He is the communication, the self-gift of God in human, the interface through which divine operation. This is why Guardini's understanding of technology has apocalyptic value. The word apocalypse comes from the Greek word apocalypsis, which means an unveiling or revelation. The French Catholic theorist writes about the technological accident crash, the invention of the plane is also the invention of the plane crash, own revelatory catastrophe. Guardini recognized that technological accidents are in this sense. They make visible what the technology was doing along, what it was foreclosing as it introduced new ones. When your iPhone battery dies, you suddenly see with new eyes what it was doing to your attentional level. When social media is taken offline, as simultaneously the uncanny absence of something they had not consciously chosen to depend upon. But the deeper accidents are perceptual, not just mechanical. They're gradual, invisible foreclosures of awareness. When the first person wrote down their thoughts on paper millennia ago, the act of human thought and speech took on a new form. And that new form changed the way they thought and spoke. Socrates talks about this in Plato's warning that writing would produce forgetfulness, journal record, rather than genuine memory. He was right, though he also made possible an entirely new range of intellectual and cultural. Every medium for closing the Catholic cosmotechnics is to remain awake to both movements simultaneously. Many know this poem, Gerard Manley Hopkins, as tumbled over rim in roundy wells, stones ring. Like each tuck string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out its name. Each mortal thing, each one dwells, selves, goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. Alongside we hear the tucked string of the violin and the sound effects, but as voices that spring forth from created things. The bell is most a bell when it rings. The stone most a stone when it falls to the earth from which it came. And we are most ourselves when we sound out who are from the depth of our being. Each I do is me, for that I came. This is not merely poetic sentiment. The human person has a nature that's fulfilled in a specific of activity, not the frictionless consumption, embodied communal work of building culture that expresses and deepens our humanity. Guardini draws out the implications with his concept of dwelling. a beautiful cottage on Lake Como, and a structure that evoke a feeling that cannot be reduced to anything literal. This is not just stones stacked on top of each other. It's an expression of the human desire for beauty, tranquility, security, and that feeling of being home in the world. The stone by other stones, expressing through human agency a purpose that was latent in the stone's nature all along. All of us are as the first house. The church is herself a cosmotechnics, a collective work culture making in which the materials of creation. The AI generated cottage that is now so easy to produce with the words typed into a prompt box is something entirely difficult place because the place never existed, though the human longing for something like it persists. It produces what psychologists call the valley, the unsettling sensation that resembles the real but lacks its density, its resistance, stubborn particularity. You cannot dwell in an AI-generated cottage. You can only be a consumer of its image. And this distinction between dwelling and consuming, between genuine participation in the world of spectatorship of its simulation, is precisely what a liturgical sensibility allows to perceive. The liturgy, a public action undertaken by a plurality of people using a plurality of signs. It's not a performance that happens to a passive. It's an action in which every word, water, bread, wine, gesture, music, silence, architecture produces a form of participation that's irreducibly richer than any single element could achieve alone. This is what our book calls the mutually irreducible parts that function together as separate but concordant. Each element of the liturgy signifies the ground of reality, the kingdom of God, in a way that's distinct and particular, and no single element tries to capture the whole. The asceticism of liturgical signs is precisely their cohabitation with other signs. This is the opposite of the great forms of the attention economy, Instagram to maximize engagement, which is the elimination of friction. It's like face at all, a computational direct contact with the content, with other, with knowledge itself, without any, is a form of idolatry in the technical sense. It's a sign that presents itself as the thing signified. A mediation faces its own mediating function. Forecloses precisely the kind of active interpretation that makes for genuine human participation in a world. And themselves as the vanguard of human liberation. But the move they're making is not new at all. It's the modern project capitulated in technological form. In the new Organon and the new Atlantis has been a sustained revolt against the category of the given. What is given in the Christian sense is a gift. The gift of creation, the gift of our body, eternal life. Bacon's project was explicitly to transform knowledge from a contemplative activity oriented towards understanding creation into an instrumental activity oriented towards the mass, condensed an entire solution in the understanding of what knowledge is for. Now peers into the microscope and says, there's an even smaller element of humans. What could not be accomplished in politics will be brought to completion at the level up with self-determination, down with metaphysics, up with physical augmentation. The transhumanists want to modify the most elemental parts of physical humanity, our own DNA, to attain the ultimate freedom, freedom from death itself. Pope Benedict addressed this logic directly in Spe Salvi, his encyclical on Christian hope. He observed that the modern age has developed a specific form of hope, a faith in progress, in the steady improvement of the human condition through scientific and technological advance that functions as together wrong, Benedict concedes. There have been real improvements in human life, real victories over disease and poverty, but the Baconian project, approximate goods that technology can deliver for the ultimate good that only God can provide. When progress becomes the horizon of human hope, death becomes intolerable, not a threshold to be crossed, but a problem to be solved. And is the logical conclusion of a hope that has lost its vertical dimension. Benedict, following Guardini, impatient, oriented towards God rather than toward our own self-creation. This is the hope that is not as Paul writes to the Romans, because it's rooted not in the Holy Spirit. It's a hope that can sustain genuine action in the world, including genuine technological action. Without needing that action to be ultimate, without to like the kingdom rather than orienting us towards it. What then does it mean to live and think in this moment with what our Catholic cosmic technics calls a liturgical sensibility? McLuhan, near the end of his life, suggested that it's especially the job of the Catholic humanist to build a theology that interfaces constructively with the artifacts of technology. It's not a matter of baptizing the dominant technologies and declaring them compatible with life, adding a crucifix to your tech from Guardini through McLuhan is content alone can't counteract. The pornography app and the prayer app may look identical from the outside, and any content analysis of technology will be helpless to explain. What matters is the ecology of attention, habit, and desire that a given technological environment cultivates over time. Nor is it a matter of retreating from the technological world into some pre-modern enclave, however that fantasy may occasionally appear. Community well. The liturgical tradition itself has always been capable of taking up new materials and new forms, stone, glass, organ music, polyphony, the printed missal, and ordering them toward their ultimate end. The question is always, whether a given technology lends itself to that rather than idolatrous, whether it can acknowledge the ground of reality rather than substituting itself. Right. This is a picture of a place called Temperance Alley Garden in DC. I have two colleagues, friends of mine, who managed this garden. It was in city lot that they were given permission to plant a community garden. And one of the gentlemen left Uber. He was an interface designer in Uber, and he got disenchanted because they having what they call Black Mirror meetings app, and then they also referred to their as supply. These are human beings, right? We put so much stuff in the cloud, and what he wanted to do is have that stuff in the cloud precipitate into the places that we live and work and cultivate. And so they built this garden, and they have all these events, concerts and yoga and prayer groups and all sorts of things. But they also have digital elements built into the garden, a little local. And the whole point of this is sort of like a Catholic subsidiarity principle, that there's a local technological solution that actually feeds the community life rather than detracts from it. So I've really admired this project. I worked with them on a recent grant with Portica. And they're doing amazing things, not just for some of these theoretical talks can get a little abstract, but these are the sorts of examples I'm thinking about when I think about liturgical sensibility. Because what that sensibility requires is the cultivation of what our book calls transmedia literacy. So the capacity to move across different media environments, to perceive how each medium shapes what can be said and known, experienced within it, and therefore to avoid a configuration of reality. This is a willingness to remain alert to the mediation that's always taking place, even when it's designed to be invisible. It is, in a word, a form of asceticism, the willingness to remain bounded, to resist the lure of a total immersion. Conclusion. So I began this lecture by describing the liminal moment between the familiar and the unknown, between the work I've done and the work I'm about to begin. I want to conclude by suggesting that the personal liminality itself a kind of theological text. The move from my industrial Pennsylvania roots through Notre Dame and onto the Eternal City is, for me, a move through several layers of the argument I've been making. My grandfather's alley in Jeanette, that gravel path between the grape arbor and the factory, was an early education in the tension between cultivation and mechanism. Culture that sings harmoniously with the environment. And his letters from Lake Como gave me the conceptual vocabulary to understand what I had been experiencing in that alley. And now, as I prepare to live within walking distance of the ruins of the Roman Forum and the living presence of the Vatican, I find myself inhabiting the intersection of these genius. Rome has been building and rebuilding itself for 3,000 years. Incorporating each successive layer of a culture without quite erasing any of them. The palimpsest of Rome is not the result of historical accident, but of specific theological conviction that the goods of creation are not to be destroyed, but transfigured, that the beauty achieved by human culture in its imperfect gropings toward the divine can be taken ordered towards its ultimate ground, Christian pilgrimage and contemplation. This is what Benedict XVI meant when he wrote, "It's the specific gift of Catholic faith to render, not by making it perfect, but by allowing it to be broken and made whole in the breaking." Sent me while I was preparing this talk, so I took it as a sign, and so I wanted to include it. He says, "All we have gained the machine threatens, so long as it makes bold to exist in the spirit instead of obeying. Lest the lovelier lingering of the glorious hand long invite us for the more resolute building, so that we might just escape it, an oiling and silent factory it would bless, that with equal resolve arrays, produces, destroys. But to us, existence is still enchanted. At 100 points, it is origin still, a playing of pure forces that no one touches who does not know and marvel. Word ever out of most tremulous stones builds demanded by genuine encounter with reality, or the face of a child, is a posture of kneeling and marveling. It's a posture of reception rather than mastery. And this is what the liturgy schools us to do. The significance of the liturgy in our argument is not utilitarian, as if we could strategically use the Mass to inoculate ourselves against the effects of algorithmic culture. Such an approach and would in truth constitute its own form of idolatry, subordinating worship of God to pragmatic human purposes. Rather, the significance of the liturgy, body and blood of Christ, and thereby become partakers of the divine nature. The liturgy does not function as a tool we deploy alternative liturgies, but as the incarnation of God that exposes all counterfeits precisely by being what it is. Its density, its resistance to reduction, its insistence on the irreducible particularity of water and oil and bread and wine and flesh, all of this forms the faithful and habits of attention that naturally result frictionless, depthless culture of the attention of mediation and relation over immediacy and pure content, the epiphanic quality of liturgical signs, are not abstract claims. They are descriptions of what it looks like in concrete practice to inhabit the technological world as a person formed by liturgy. They describe a way of engaging with computational power that treats it as genuinely powerful, worth taking seriously, worth understanding in its mechanics, without treating it as ultimate, as the only possible configuration of human experience. What Francis Bacon announced that the purpose of learning was the relief of man's estate, he was making a claim that resonated powerfully with a world exhausted by disease, famine, early death. And in many respects, the Baconian project has delivered on its promises. We do live longer and healthier lives than our ancestors. But the deepest relief of man's estate, the relief from the anxiety of finitude, from the terror of death, and from the loneliness of a self turned in on itself, is not something that technology can provide. It's something that can only be received, and only from a source that's not ourselves. The Catholic tradition has always understood this, and it's what gives our reflection on media and technology its shape. We engage these questions with genuine curiosity and without panic, because we know that the framing of the question is not how do we survive the technological revolution, but how do we receive it as part of a world that belongs to God. The empty barrel that keeps Poe's sailor afloat while everything else is sucked under, the unlikely piece of wood that the priests and brothers of Holy Cross would remind us is the cross, our only hope, is precisely this conviction that reality is given before it is made, that the human person is received before they receive anything, and that the most technically sophisticated culture in human history can only be truly humanizing to the extent that it remains ordered toward the God in whom we live and move and have our being. In Rome, I will teach media theory not far from the Pantheon, a structure that stood for 2,000 years and that manages through the simple device of a circular opening in its dome to make the light of the sky perpetually present within a human interior. Every day as the sun moves, the oculus traces a different path across the walls and floor, transforming the same space into something new. No algorithm designed it, no behavioral engineer optimized it, no venture capitalist funded it. It was built by people who believed that human craft, at its best, is a participation in the ongoing work of creation. That is still the task. It's always been the task. And in this liminal moment we share, it remains the only task worth the full weight of our attention and desire. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Wonderful. Brad, thanks so very much. We have time now for questions. I failed to reserve a piece of technology called a microphone. So just if you have a question, I'll let Brett call upon people and just sort of use your outside voice.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
This takes a little moment.
Then warm up.
I'll start with one. The sociologist of religion, Berger, talks about plausibility structures in liturgy and worship. So a good example in the Catholic tradition, we believe that the host in the tabernacle is the real presence of Jesus Christ. And so when we come to the tabernacle, we bow or we genuflect. So that's a structure that we do that is affirming some invisible belief, right? That we believe is the real presence, so we bow or we genuflect. it seems to me that technology is also how we use it is the plausibility structures, right? Like when we're walking on campus, we can either be looking at our phone or we can be saying, "Hi, good afternoon." Like there's a sense that even how we use technology, it does reveal sort of what we value. Uh, would you agree with that? And how do we sort of discipline ourselves to adopt plausibility structures that benefit the good of ourselves and the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had a moment earlier today to go over to that beautiful Our Lady of Fatima area at the top of the next to the church. And I was praying a rosary, and I was looking at my hands, and I noticed that my thumb was doing the same thing it does when I use my phone, right? So there are these like gestures and rituals and customs that we develop alongside our technology that in a way compete with, replace in some cases, some of the same bodily gestures and habits and rituals that we may have had in a more religious time or era or a personal practice. And so I think that aping of those even embodied practices as it relates to technology can shift our focus, our attention away from I think the correct plausibility structure, which would be our faith, towards something that looks plausibly powerful and engaging, that gives us knowledge, that gives us, even some foresight or whatever, but replaces a more, as I said in the talk, a sort of more liturgical sense of the world as gift and not as something to be just purely controlled. So, yeah, thank you. Yes.
With our development of technology, if we've gone too far, and if we have, can we find our way back to it being a tool and being something we work alongside rather than something we focus on?
Yeah, I think so. I think historically we've seen that. You know, I always wonder, I'm always curious about like what happened when like the telephone entered the home, 100 years ago, if there was a panic over the fact that people would no longer go out and talk to their neighbors because they had a phone. Um, and a lot of these technologies end up becoming almost like the wallpaper, right? They're just sort of in the background, and we sort of worry and fret less about them as they become more commonplace. I do think that the AI revolution is different in the sense that previous technologies, as McLuhan would say, they extend parts of ourself, right? So a hammer extends the fist, the phone extends the ear. So we have these physical senses and faculties that technology is able to extend, and there's some utility in that if they're used in a disciplined way. But what AI is doing is it's extending something of our interior faculties. So our memory, our imagination, our cognition. There's all these studies now from MIT about issues around cognitive drop-off when people are using AI to write or to assist them. So you're really starting to mess with the elements of the soul. These are faculties of the soul, powers of the soul, as Thomas Aquinas says. So it's one thing to extend, your foot by riding a bike, okay, or driving a car. So maybe we aren't in as great a shape as we used to be when we used to walk everywhere, but okay, the car has brought some utility. Um, and we can walk if we want to. But I feel like now that we're in this sort of digital AI environment, the way that thought and knowledge is being shaped, shared, and accessed is doing formative work on our own souls, our own minds. So that's an invisible work. You can point to cars and say, okay, there's too much pollution. Let's make electric cars. We have all these remediations, but this seems a little more subtle and insidious and all-encompassing in that way. So I'm not trying to be a doomsayer here. I think your question is the right one. It's how do we harness it, discipline it in ways that do keep us oriented towards you guys are all in school. I mean, sort of the pedagogical goals of teaching and learning, where you're not offloading that to something else. That has to be tamed, and that requires, discipline and habit. Yes, Father.
There's a lot going on in your talk, lots to think about. I'm going to stick with one part of it where you, in a sentence, connected the pornographic app and the prayer app almost in the same breath, right? And I think people can move from one to the other within seconds, right? And I guess I'm just wondering, what you think about the prayer app, right? Obviously, it's a better material than maybe you would find on a pornographic app. But I guess part of me was wondering if you were even critiquing the prayer app, right, as not enough, or maybe it moves prayer into the mode of consuming rather than dwelling. You know, I'm just trying to work through your idea there. Are they different, really, at the end of the day, in terms of the argument of your paper?
I knew that one would get a question. That's a great one. So yeah, so the point I wanted to make was that the environment in which those two are housed are always and already forming our habits of attention and desire and so on. So the content in that sense, in McLuhan's sense, has become secondary because the environment is what's really doing the formation. So the fact that my attention is now attenuated or diminished by using this machine at all means that even entering into a prayer app, I'm now more prone to distractibility and the other things that work against me wanting to pray. So that said, I have students that use these apps and have had like tremendous and inspiring conversion stories and come back to their faith. A friend of mine at Easter, who I went to school with at Notre Dame, he just retired from the FBI, came back to the church and finally baptized all three of his children who were teenagers at that time. And he does Father Mike Schmidt's Bible in a year every day, catechism in a year. So I see real value in these things from evangelization perspective. As a media argument, though, I worry about, prayer rendered as feed, prayer gamified, prayer with Marky Mark or Gwen Stefani, right, celebrified. So I'm actually working with a new app company, so I'll plug it because I have shares in it, so I want you to buy it. So it's called Testament, and they're doing what they're calling the anti-feed. So what they want people to do is to capture meaningful moments that are happening to them in the world. Maybe it's a prayer for a child or a spiritual reflection. And over time, this kind of vault of human memory uses a local AI, so not a open AI server somewhere, mining your data and selling it to Palantir, but like a real local secure, and looks for patterns in your spiritual life and starts to give you doesn't give you like prescriptions, but says like, you prayed about this a year ago and this is what happened or something. So it's a memory device rather than a entertainment or feed device. And I found that really, really interesting because it's hard to there's still something very ephemeral about praying on an app. You sort of do your thing and then you're done and then you're off to the other app or whatever. In this case, you're really building a foundation of memory and restoring, as that other question alluded to, something of the human in alongside the use of the technology, which would be the cultivation of the memory faculty in the soul. So I think that would be my wandering answer to that. Thank you for the question. Yes, in the back.
Well, for those that do make it through this and they made it through on trials. So, like in a way, like I understand that, I'm not talking about like children, like having access to their phones, but like grown adults, is it not just a test of their free will?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think this is all about will and attention and desire. And I have to say, I've been teaching for 25 years and I've seen the shift. I mean, I think you guys are way more conscious of what's going on. The things I was describing here as being invisible, you get it. And so that gives me great hope. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if I said these things, people, threw tomatoes at me. It's like, what are you talking about? It's connecting us all. It's great. Now it's like, nah, I need to think about this and I need to practice some discipline and will. So absolutely, you're not determined by these things at all. But returning to the liturgical, we do have to cultivate those habits and dispositions so that we can exercise our will towards the good. So that's what I would say to that. Thank you. Yes.
Driving the other day, and I had a small observation of how many fast food restaurants exist within such a small area. And I was thinking, wow, one time we were at a point where a lot of people were protesting against that because of all the related health risks with consuming the fast food and not having the healthy options at those establishments, but they're so convenient. And I attended one of the honors capstone presentations where it was highlighted that AI is expanding and it's going to grow and it's pretty much inevitable. And so I drew a comparison of, well, if we coexist with the fact that we have to choose between the healthy and unhealthy choices, even though it's more convenient with the fast food restaurants, do you think that in regards to free will, AI will go the same way with us living around it and in it?
Yeah, well, I think yes, I do. And I do think there's another analogy buried in there, which I think is the over processing of information. So processed food, fast food, the health effects are because it's so over processed. I think the cognitive effects, intellectual, spiritual effects of AI and digital media are that it is very processed information. And so we're not getting so if you have like when I wrote this book, I would use Google search to look for sources, and I'd get a list of books and I would go to the library, and inevitably I would bump into other books on the shelf that didn't come up in the Google search that were actually better for what I was looking for. So I think there has to be some balance between the consumption of that over processed information, which seems limitless and sort of the ultimate authority, but often misses things that are just kind of hidden still in the real world. As far as free will goes, one of the things I worry about with AI again is, a lot of these Google engineers who I've talked to directly are really interested in what they call predictive programming or behavioral programming, where they have so much data on you now that they can say, if this person likes to get up at 6 a.m., go to the gym, they have coffee at this place, they tend to study over. They build all these kind of matrices of patterns, and then they can predict like when you're going to buy your protein smoothie at every Tuesday. For you don't see that as a pattern, but they see it as a pattern. So they start predicting that, and can influence behavior through nudges and prompts and different things. So that bothers me because they're really intent on figuring that out and being able to predict behavior and also influence behavior. So as far as the will argument goes there, I think we have more to watch out for. But these are all great points, so thank you. Yes.
I think that then you have kids where all they've ever known is the world with technology, because they're around our age. Like, what do you do in your parenting style and in your daily life?
Thank you. Yeah, so I have 5 kids. My oldest is 20, my youngest is 6. And so they're like my lab rats. So I like experiment on them. So my oldest one, it was easy because I said, okay, we didn't even have a TV. Like we lived in this like cabin in Athens and no internet, no TV. I used to have to drive to the coffee shop and sit in the parking lot to get some Wi-Fi. And I watched this kid grow up and without access to this stuff for most of his adolescence. And he took to things like blacksmithing and sculpting and working with his hands and doing this amazing stuff. And now he's studying architecture at Notre Dame. He's working with this famous sculptor. He's going to be working on the restoration of San Clemente when he's in Rome. So he has all these like manual, almost trade skills he's developed of making things with his hands. And I would reflect, we built a forge in the garage for him. And as a 12-year-old, he's out there hammering steel. And you think as a father, there are lessons in this about things. It doesn't bend that way, or it has to be hotter for it to do this. Those like physical things that don't seem like intellectual things are really instructive for forming somebody's mind and heart and soul about there's going to be hard things in life. And sometimes we don't bend that way or whatever. After him, we got lazy and there was exposure to the other kids and those poor children. They're different. They are different. They're not blacksmithing. They're very into watching football or whatever, what normal kids do today. So I've seen the gradations as we've kind of like lost control. It was a scale problem mostly with 5 kids to try to keep up, but they have their older brother and they look up to him. And when they all fail, we'll say, "But we had this one, right?" And so this answer is going off a cliff. So I would say you're already asking the question. So I would say, yeah, if you're conscious of these things and there are practices in your home, like we don't have a TV in our living room, it's in the basement. So I call that Plato's cave, right? You go in the dark with the shadows and look at that. But when you're up here, you're with your family, we're talking, we're having meals together. So there's little things you can, talking about environments, you can build into your physical environment to cultivate the kind of habits that you want to cultivate in your children. So I would say that is probably your best strategy because it's a flood right now. Yes.
Your point about the digital programming and past, what would you see as the best counter to that? Is it regulation? Is it the moral formation? What would be the best approach?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as well versed on the regulatory stuff, although I know it's important. I work with a lot of people that work in ethics of AI and internet who are very into these problems. Even I don't know if you know Magisterium AI is like a Catholic AI that is trained only on church documents and teaching. And so on the surface, it looks like a great tool, but it's run on ChatGPT servers because the problem with any kind of AI company is that the most expensive part is the hardware and the energy required to run these things. So what you have to do is you have to contract with these larger companies. And that means your data is owned by somebody else. So not just the church documents and everything else, but also what people are asking. Their deepest spiritual questions are accessible to these companies that could also be accessible to the government and so on. And that's where the behavioral stuff gets really crazy and weird because if they know that about me, I mean, okay, fine, they know where I buy my coffee and do this, but they also know that like I'm struggling with my faith. I mean, then you get into really dangerous territory. And I know I won't name them, but there's one evangelical app company that that does sell their data to Palantir, which is sort of surveillance technology for the U.S. And so you have millions of evangelical Christians who are being basically surveyed by Alex Karp and all those folks. So it's a weird world, and so I would appeal to everyone to, before you pick up your app and ask a question, we've got half a dozen priests in this room. Go talk to them. Form relationships with people first. Use it as a supplement, not as a substitution or a replacement.
Dr. Robinson, thanks so very much. This is a continuing conversation, of course. The technology is always going to be with us and developments. And so this has been just really insightful to help us to think through theologically and to be awake as we deal with these topics. So thank you very much.
Thank you.